You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have an unusual guest. As most of our regular viewers would know, we actually have candidates here or people holding office. Today we have Dr. Arie Friedman, who once was a candidate in the 10th Congressional District Republican primary. We're taping this show on July 17th, and we might ask Arie Friedman to start the show. Are you a candidate for public office?
Not at this time, I'm not. But I'm strongly considering it.
Playing it coy. And what office would you be thinking about running for?
Well, there's a couple of offices in the area. The 9th Congressional District is something I've been asked to consider running for, though it's not really where I'm from and don't live in it at this time. And then the 29th State Senate District is where I actually live, and I've considered that as well.
And you are a Republican?
I am a Republican.
By training or by birth?
By training.
By training.
Certainly not by birth.
I've heard you once were a Democrat. Is that right?
If you considered dropping literature off when you're 8 years old for your dad, the Democrat precinct committeeman, I was. But almost all of my adult life, I've been a Republican.
Well, so you mean you changed that coming out of high school?
Probably had a little bit of a transition in college, and right out of college joined the Navy as a Navy pilot, and that was a very formative experience.
So wait, you went to the University of Chicago?
I did.
As an undergrad. It's a hotbed of communists. No, I'm just kidding. I went to the University of Chicago. It's a great school, but they do lean left in many areas.
They
in economics, they don't. In law, they don't. You were in biology. Would you say they leaned left in biology?
There was a little bit of an environmentalist leaning to it, but you know, I think my education was pretty good. I had some econ courses with some very conservative people.
You did? Anybody we know?
No, I don't think so.
Not big names, but they were free market kind of guys?
They were free market people,
You're
absolutely.
a free market kind of guy?
I am.
Okay. Through and through. Is there anything you don't believe in the free market about?
I think it's a little bit hard to build roads and maybe some power infrastructure could be...
So things that laid out here in the Constitution of the United States, authorities given to the Congress, right, to the executive, to the judiciary, to engage in certain responsibilities.
Right.
You believe in the Constitution?
I do believe in the Constitution.
Strict constructionist?
Pretty strict.
Okay. But so people are watching the show on, well, we're taping it on July 17th, but they'll start watching in the suburbs the week of July 25th.
Sure.
By then, the president has said we must have legislation drafted that would deal with raising the debt limit. Is he right, Dr. Arie Friedman? You
know, I think that the people who are reliable and who I trust say he is right, that it has to be done. Paul Ryan came out just recently, and you know, no greater opponent of the president on economic issues than Paul Ryan exists, and he was very clear, we have to raise the debt limit.
We do. And what would Paul Ryan, congressman from Wisconsin, chairman of the Budget Committee?
Correct.
In the House of Representatives, some would say a possible candidate for President of the United States. He wouldn't say that.
He wouldn't say that.
But some might say, so what does Paul Ryan have to say as to, should we just have, as the president once said, a clean bill that increases the debt limit and doesn't deal with spending, taxes, et cetera?
Well, you know, the Republicans offered that.
Recently.
Right. And it was resoundingly defeated by Democrats and Republicans alike.
But what do you think? If you were king, what would you do? Should there be a clean bill?
I think that this is our moment, not as a Republican or as a member of a party or a political philosophy. This is our moment as a society to get our hands around some very difficult issues. We should be using this as our opportunity to solve the issues of debt.
So what would you do if you were representing the 9th Congressional District? Say you chose to run against Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky. So you got the Republican nomination and then you beat her and go back in time, say you were now the congressman as opposed to the congresswoman, right, July 17th. What would be your position if you were king in terms of increasing the debt limit? Would you increase it? If so, by how much? And what would you say should go along with that increase?
Right. I think the gold standard is that whatever dollar amount you increase it by, that you've got cuts equal at least to 2 to 1, and use it also as an opportunity to pass a balanced budget amendment. That's our moment now to do that. So if we're asking for a $2 trillion debt increase limit, we should have $2 to $4 trillion in cuts, real cuts, not promises.
Obama has said, he'd negotiate a $4 trillion cut in spending.
Well, he didn't ask for cuts. He asked for
a $4 trillion decrease in the debt. I think is what he said.
With dramatic increases in taxes.
Did he say 3 to 1? No, didn't he say 3 to 1 for every $3 in cuts in spending, there'd be $1 increase in tax revenue?
No, I don't think that's what he said.
What did he say?
I don't think anybody's heard a specific plan come out of the president yet. I think
he has not had a specific proposal.
No, and that's what they're asking.
Has he had a budget for 2012?
Which was, yes, and it was resoundingly 97 to 0 defeated in the Senate.
So his own party didn't support
That's
it.
correct.
And since then, he has had no proposed
Made
budget.
a speech, and when the Congressional Budget Office was asked to judge what that speech meant as far as the future of our country's economy, they said we don't score speeches.
Okay, so you would, if you were king, if you were president, you got a mug there that says President of the United States.
That's right, you did.
Show people that'll be a mugshot if you hold that up, right? Okay, there you go. It's a mugshot. Thanks to Joe Morris for that. We'll explain that later. All right. So, if you were president, you would come up with $4 trillion decrease in the debt.
Absolutely.
A plan for $4 trillion. At least. And how much of that would be spending cuts?
Oh, almost all of it would be.
Over what, 10-year period?
Look, over a 10-year period. But
so that's $400 billion cuts
right.
in spending each year.
That 4 over 10.
400 billion, 10 years, right. That would be $4 trillion.
But let's also
right?
look at this issue
we
of
tax reform. We got to get slide rule out to do that?
That's right, you brought that with you.
Okay.
There's tax reform is an important issue. This is also our moment to address the tax reform, which is that we've got a tax system filled with loopholes for special entities. And so everybody thinks we need to close those loopholes, and we use that to level the base. Everybody gets a lower tax rate, and we're all treated on a level playing field.
So you're foreclosing tax loopholes?
As long as it's used to reduce tax rates and not simply to increase taxes on people.
Right, but that's, will there be a net increase in tax revenue as a result of the closing of the loopholes, but yet cutting of the rates of taxation?
As Marco Rubio said, what we need are more taxpayers, not more taxes. Okay. If you level the playing field and everybody's playing on the same field, and now with their special deals from Congress, and everybody's tax rates lower, we grow the economy, create jobs, and increase revenue. So everybody wants more revenue.
But before the economy grows, assuming you're saying with a lower tax rate, you will grow the economy. Let's
Absolutely.
break this up in stages. But assuming no additional growth, although we realize that's probably contrary to what we learn in economics
right.
at the University of Chicago. But assuming for the arguendo for the moment,
sure.
You just have a cut in rates of taxation, and you have a closing of loopholes.
Right, a leveling of
Would
the
there
base.
be any increase in revenue without economic growth by that scheme?
I don't know the answer to that question.
But you would be okay if there weren't, just that alone. You would expect to see a growth in tax revenue as a result of the economy.
You want that to be at least neutral.
Okay, at least
on
neutral.
The face of it, assuming no growth, assuming no change in the economy, and then you rely upon that to make the economy a better place.
And for that $4 trillion deficit, or $4 trillion decrease in the deficit over 10 years, what would you look for in terms of cuts in spending? $4 trillion?
Yes.
So basically all on the spending side, nothing on the revenue side is gravy. If the economy grows and you start generating more revenue, that's gravy.
You say it like it's sort of hopeful. I think it's far more than hopeful.
I think your certainty.
I think it's a certainty.
You're not sure whether it's 10% growth in tax revenue, 20, but it's positive.
We're on the wrong side of that Laffer curve, where the more you increase taxes, the worse the economy gets, and the revenues go down.
We're on the wrong side. So lowering tax rates, you're sure tax revenue will go up.
Well,
you're sure of that?
I'm sure of it, absolutely, and I'm sure of another thing, which is that the government deciding through all of these loopholes who wins and loses is bad for the economy. What we want is everybody to pay their fair share in taxes. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we do this class warfare of targeting the millionaires and billionaires, which the president keeps saying over again. Everybody pays taxes, as many people as possible, and there's no special deals for certain kinds of behavior. We let our own economy decide what the behavior is, and it grows as a result of that.
No social engineering, using the tax rates.
Business engineering, crony capitalism. Why does GE pay no taxes? GE paid no federal income tax.
Last year?
Last year. Why is that? Because they have targeted all of the loopholes perfectly.
And the head of that company is Jeff Immelt?
Jeff Immelt, who's on the president's economic advisory team.
You think there's a relationship? He pays no taxes, he gets appointed to that.
I don't
the president
know the answer
doesn't,
to that.
because the president rails against companies not paying taxes and closing the loopholes.
Right.
What would he say if he were here and I said, Mr. President, do you think you should close that loophole that GE has, or is that not a loophole?
I think that he would start talking about green energy and how that's
important.
GE does a lot of green energy
a lot of that,
and all the other various things that those loopholes are supposedly for.
So that's what you would do. Now we're talking about decreasing the debt, but we're also talking about closing the deficit.
Correct.
The two are
and tax reform, tax reform designed to improve the economy.
And raising the debt limit. So the simple economics of this is that the deficit is a flow concept. It means that we are spending more, project to spend more in the fiscal year 2012 than we're receiving in tax revenue.
42 cents on the dollar.
Right. So it means we borrow 42 cents of every dollar we spend.
Every dollar we spend.
We spend, the federal government budget is roughly $4 trillion.
It's not. Around 2 trillion.
No, I think it's closer to 4 trillion. Maybe three something.
1.6 was the deficit. So
right.
So
it's
about
maybe three and a half.
Correct.
Okay. It's hard to keep track of those numbers. Get your minds around what $3.5 trillion means.
I did see a description of what it was. There's a description online, which is if you took Soldier Field and filled it to the height of a man all the way across in $100 bills, you'd be approximating $1 trillion.
Okay. And you think the Bears would win if we spent that, if we had that as a salary cap?
Right, exactly.
Okay. All right, so $3.5 trillion budget. The deficit is about $160 billion a month, maybe $150 billion, so it's a little less than $2 trillion a year. Okay. So what people should realize, if you don't raise the debt limit and you're running a deficit, the only thing you can do is to go out and cut spending elsewhere to get your deficit down to zero. Right. Part of that deficit is spending. Part of the spending you're doing to incur that deficit is entitlement spending. Part of it is defense spending. Part of it is domestic spending, and then part of it is payment on the debt, which is basically interest, since we're not really retiring the debt.
Right. It's around $35 billion a month.
So if we don't raise the debt limit, that would be a problem. We would have to cut spending somewhere else.
Dramatically.
And you're not in favor of doing that right now. That would be too much of an adjustment.
Well, right. I think that what we need is, we take this opportunity to make the changes we need, and recognizing that we haven't given ourselves enough time to do that before we really end up in a corner.
Okay, so we've dealt with the deficit. We need to cut the spending, and that'll lower the deficit over time. To give people some perspective here, we're running a monthly deficit of about, a yearly deficit of about $1.6 to $1.8 trillion. Now, in the Bush administration, when people were talking about the deficit being too high, I think we ran a deficit of about $500 billion. So this is about 3 times as much on a yearly basis.
By the time the president's first term, only term hopefully, is over, he will have amassed more debt for our country than all of the previous presidents combined.
Okay. But to be fair, Bush did a fair chunk of amassing debt as well.
You don't find people like me applauding the spending policies of the Bush population.
I think the numbers the debt in America went from 1998, which was the end of the Clinton years, through the Bush years to the first few Obama years. I think it's gone from $5 trillion to $14 trillion. I don't know.
It's astonishing.
We can check on that. Maybe somebody will fact check that for us and send the results to jbcg@aol.com. Of course, you can watch, you're watching the show most likely on cable in Chicago and Rockford and Aurora and the Chicago metro suburbs. But folks, sometimes if you want to watch it faster, even before it shows, you can see it on youtube.com/Public Affairs TV. And we're fair and balanced. We should say that. You are a Republican. You went through a transformation. We've invited you here. You were on our show when you ran in the Republican primary.
I did.
Okay. We had Democrats on as well. People would know that. We were looking for a spot to fill for this Sunday, so we reached out to 3 Democrats: McKinsey, Sheehan, and Schneider. Almost like a law firm. McKinsey, Schneider, and Sheehan. That's better. And Sheehan I don't know, we had a phone number for his campaign office. We never heard back, so maybe his campaign's just gearing up. Maybe he doesn't check his phone much. I don't know. McKinsey, we actually contacted him at Ernst & Lear, biggest law firm, so thought we could get in touch. Never heard back. Schneider, we spoke, and he actually called back, and he was marching in parade, but he said for the next month, the most important thing to do is raising money. It's important to raise money.
Absolutely it is.
But you're here, and you're not running for office yet.
I'm not raising money either.
And you're not raising money. But if you were running for office and you were out raising money, would you take time to do the show?
I did last time.
And why? Because you think maybe, if you're running for Congress, we air in all of the 9th Congressional District. You think people would want to see that. We air in a large part of the 10th Congressional District. You think people would want to communicate? A half an hour of earned media. If you're asking somebody to give you money and you're a candidate, what kind of person's going to write you a check instead of say, look, go on Berkowitz, it's free. All you have to do is answer some tough questions, right?
Not that tough.
So Brad and Bob and Elia And Bob, we should say we've extended the invitation to Bob Dole too. He was here. He was here right after the primary in 2010, but it's been now. He's been in office for like almost 9 months. I think, Bob, they want a report from you.
I think he'll be happy to come in, probably.
You think you can bend his elbow and get him on for? All right.
it.
Can you get Joe Walsh here too? Because we haven't heard from Joe since we knew Joe when nobody knew Joe. You know, when he was running the primary and the Republican Party wouldn't have anything to do with it. Where did he go? On public affairs. But now we call, and Joe said he was going to try to do it last weekend, and then he didn't, and they didn't give me another date.
I'm sure they're waiting for me to tell them the best thing to do.
is come on here. Because the sales argument is Barack Obama came on the show 6 times and he became president of the United States. We're thinking you might, well, you're on twice, so you're well on your way to becoming president of the United States.
Next week?
All right.
We can do it next week.
So a slight digression. We've dealt with the debt crisis. We've dealt with the raising the debt limit. Somehow that'll be worked out by the time people see the show.
One way or another.
One way or the other. It's not, the United States is not going to not raise the debt limit.
Right.
They're not going to cut spending dramatically. They're not going to default.
I imagine there'll be what will probably arise from it. Not that I'm a fan of this, is some sort of interim method just to get them to the election.
The Republicans say cut, cap, and balance. Cut spending.
Right.
Cap spending
As a percentage of
statutorily
GDP,
or
absolutely.
constitutionally, and have a balanced budget amendment to Constitution.
Right.
They should say cut, cap, balance, end.
Grow, absolutely.
Well, yeah, you want a growth agenda. I mean, people, you're the Republican Party. You got all this money coming in and all this money to spend, and nobody has thought, it's not the right phrase, cut, cap, and balance. I mean, am I...
You know, you've got a
Do you
great
have to
addition
be?
to it.
Do you have to be like a Madison Avenue ad writer to figure that out?
Perhaps, but that is what it's all about.
Growth.
I mean, we don't, the idea of cutting government expenditures, leveling the tax base, these things aren't just about protecting millionaires and billionaires, so that all of us can have an environment in which we can grow our businesses, thrive, and prosper.
Yeah, so it's all growth. We want a bigger pie.
Right. More taxpayers, not more
Now, but
taxes.
some redistribution has to occur. You have low-income people. They need some assistance. You're not saying we shouldn't in any way assist low-income people, whether it's through the state or the federal
I'm a
government.
pediatrician. The problem is that when you take a program, you and I have talked at times about Medicaid, when you take a program like Medicaid, originally designed to help the most needy of children, provide them a safety net, and you expand it to the point where it's a very large program covering all sorts of people who really don't qualify as the most needy, then you create a disaster.
And has that happened in the state of Illinois?
The state of Illinois is the poster child for that.
We have a Medicaid program. Most states, as people would know, they have something equivalent to Medicaid. There's a state health care subsidized program. And there's also a Medicare program on the federal level. And the federal government participates in Medicaid, right?
They do. I don't think people in fact, I know most people don't realize how dramatically different the Medicaid programs are from state to state and how dramatic their outcomes,
in Illinois, roughly,
can be.
we had Julie Hamos, who nicely came on this show. She's the director of the Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services. And she explained there were, about 2.8 million people on Medicaid, right?
Right.
Now, do you think that's appropriate? Do you think that's too much, too few? What?
Just look at the outcomes. It's not appropriate. It's 40% of our budget, between 14 and 17 billion. I think 17 billion is her department's cost. It's 14 billion is the cost of the Medicaid program. We're paying, say, a doctor to see a 3-year-old for a well child visit. We're paying them $30 for that visit because the money's simply not there. The payment cycles out.
We're paying them $30 a visit, but the actual cost of the doctor is how much?
Significantly more than that.
Do you take Medicaid
we don't
patients?
anymore.
You don't?
Because we were losing money.
Are you unpatriotic, would you say, as a result of that?
Some people would say that I am. We see patients as charity. You know, one of the things...
Wait, so you see patients as charity, but you won't take Medicaid because you're losing money on that.
I'd rather...
Why not take Medicaid
it's
and make up the difference as charity?
Why not just see charity?
Well, can anybody see you on charity?
Well, one of the dirty little secrets...
You must have a queue there.
One of the dirty little secrets of this move to put Medicaid patients in managed care is that we are going to eliminate charity care in this state. Why? Because in order to make referrals, write prescriptions, in the end, in that managed care system, you will have to be one of their preferred managed care providers. So a guy like me, who doesn't want to take 18 cents on the dollar from the state, 162 days to get paid, doesn't want that, would rather just see patients for free.
You can't, Medicaid patient can't go there
I will not be able to write
choice.
referrals or write medications once that program comes to its logical conclusion.
All right, and you want to be doing charity in your form, not in the way it's mandated by the
That's
government.
correct. Again, when I have a contract with the government and every year they decide they're going to pay me less, that's not charity, that's being ripped off.
But I understand now from Director Hamos that under her management, and maybe under Pat Quinn's management, the limit has been, used to be that you could go and benefit from Medicaid no matter what your income was, or at least tried to. Now the limit is set at 3 times the poverty level, roughly $60,000 annual income.
That's an outgrowth.
So you can see that now people over $60,000 aren't eligible for Medicaid. Do you think that's appropriate?
I think
or would you make it a lower level?
Well,
would you lower that cap?
It should be lower.
What should it be?
It should be somewhere around the poverty line.
20,000. You think anybody with any family, is that a family of 4 with an income over 20,000 can afford health care? They don't need help?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. That's not true. What we need to do.
Do they need government help, or should it all be private?
Well, first of all, no matter what the income level is, the able-bodied adults in that family shouldn't be covered under Medicaid, but they are now.
No matter what their income level, they shouldn't be covered on Medicaid?
The able-bodied adults?
So you have
no.
2 people.
Didn't we go through this whole welfare reform argument back in the Clinton era? That able-bodied adults should not be on welfare.
Even if they're looking for a job, they can't get a job, 9.2%
That's what COBRA's about, right? You've
unemployment.
got your COBRA.
That's only lasts for 18 months, right?
18 months, right? Well,
and that's pretty expensive, too.
We keep it going forever, and then what's the motivation to go get a job? I mean, that's really the concern. So we can put everybody on.
So you're incentivizing people leaving, but you might have some concerns.
I think
on
if you
high
went
unemployment,
around,
9.2%.
If you went around and asked most members of the Illinois residents, do you think that able-bodied people should be getting their health care for free from the state? I think most people would agree that that's not appropriate. Now, the reason why even more so it's not appropriate.
Do I think that most able, what was the question?
Whether or not most able-bodied, whether people in Illinois, residents, if you ask them whether able-bodied adults should be on Medicaid getting their health care for free from the state.
Do they get it for free, or they just get
it's free.
assistance?
It's completely free.
Medicaid is completely free?
Medicaid is completely free.
But you can still get billed for the doctor for the remainder,
No,
right? You can?
There's no balance billing.
In Medicare you can, but not in Medicaid?
No, there's no balance billing in Medicare.
Are you sure?
I'm completely sure.
Didn't you ever see bills that say they go to Medicare people and
say
there's
a deductible
you were
and a
individually responsible for that?
There's a deductible and copay. No,
you're individually
no
responsible for that?
In fact, one of the ideas in
no, I think you're wrong.
No, I'm not.
Well, did they try to do that and it's illegal?
One of the there's about 17 physicians who are Republicans in Congress right now. One of their bills to address the issue of the problem that people on Medicare can't get access to doctors because nobody's taking anymore. Right. For example, Mayo Clinic is no longer taking new Medicare. Their solution is to allow balance billing. So if I charge $200 for a service,
then they'll take it. Okay.
And you can, whatever the government pays, I'll take, you owe the rest. Okay. That's balance billing.
And what happens if the person doesn't have the income to pay for that?
They have to find a different doctor.
Okay.
Or we have to negotiate or have a conversation, or we can compete.
Okay.
You can offer a lower cost, you can offer a lower price to try and track my patients, and then I might have to respond to that.
Overall, you support the Paul Ryan approach to Medicare?
Well, I absolutely do. That Medicare program is going off the cliff.
But he says, people say he wants to voucherize it. The president says it's going to be too expensive for people. They'll have a large amount of additional money to pay for Medicare that they don't currently pay.
Right.
Is the president being truthful about that?
The president is not being truthful about that. What he's forgetting about, because he always forgets about it, is again the effect of a competitive economy on price. So sure, in a static economy where nothing you do ever has any effect on anything, that would be true. But people with real insurance competing in an open market, guys like me are going to have to try to attract patients. A physician's office. I either offer the services they like, so that I'll attract them, or I offer more efficient services, or I lower my costs to get more patients. I offer coupons, I do something. That's what we're relying upon when we get people back into a marketplace. And it always fascinates me that the Democrats, like the president, always say, well, we need market reforms. They're going to have a fake marketplace that we build that you can go buy your insurance, but they never commit to a real free market.
On the state level, just since you said you might run in the state Senate seat, for the 29th state Senate seat, the incumbent, of course, is Susan Garrett, been there now quite a while.
That's right.
State senator. Tax increases. The Illinois state government increased the income tax from 3% to 5%.
Sure.
Would you support that?
No.
You would have voted against that?
I would have voted against
Susan Garrett voted against it. Any difference between you and her?
But all along the way,
on that issue?
Well, sure, because all along the way, she's voted for the things that have gotten us into this trouble in the first place.
Spending increases.
Spending increases, bond. She's every single Rod Blagojevich bond issue, $18 billion here, $6 billion there. She voted for those. Every program expansion, she's voted for those. She's the whip. She's the Democratic whip in the Senate. And the idea that she's not responsible for all of these things that have led us here, and then in the last minute, it's going to vote against.
You'd be running on that if you run against her. That even though she voted against the income tax increase, your point is she's done things that made
she's even made public statements that the tax increase is putting us on the right path. Does anybody really believe that?
She's made that even though she said she voted against it. So we've invited Senator Garrett here. She's been here many times. We thank her for doing that. She's been really conscientious that way, but haven't seen her so much lately, so we would like to see her and get her side of the story.
Sure.
Okay. We're going to go back and forth as we've been doing the whole show in the remaining few minutes between state and federal level. Just on the state side, so the whole budget, you know, which is the general revenue fund for the state of Illinois, about $33 billion. No, maybe it's $36 billion. I don't even know. Do you know what it is?
It's about $32 billion.
$32 billion.
But here, have you ever tried to figure it out?
It's hard because there's a total budget, which is like $55 billion, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems we have in a state like this is
there's
no transparency.
Yeah. Too much spending and too high taxes? Is that your point on the state level?
Absolutely.
Federal level, too high spending, too much taxes?
It's a common theme.
But you're a military guy. You went into the military, into the Navy for 7 years. Naval Aviator, right?
Was in reserves for another 11.
Desert Storm, Desert Shield.
Desert Storm.
Desert Storm.
Shield.
Okay, Desert Storm. The Persian Gulf, getting Saddam Hussein back out of Kuwait, right?
My little part was little 65-knot circles over the Gulf in the middle of the night.
Okay. And so, nice background there, University of Chicago undergrad, University of Illinois Medical School, honors at University of Illinois Medical School. How many years? 11 years in the Navy?
18 total, including the reserve time.
Okay. So you would be strong on defense. You would support the efforts that would occur in Afghanistan. You would criticize the president for backing out too early in 2012.
Well, I think the primary is not necessarily the day we leave, but telling the enemy when we're going to leave. I think everybody's got.
You didn't think that was a good idea?
I think most people who with military background think that's a mistake.
What about the people who say we've been in Afghanistan for 10 years? Too long?
I think you stay until the job is done.
Really? So you have no regrets. You'd be running on that position, get it done, even if it takes 12, 15 years.
What's our alternative? I mean, I'm Jewish. What's the alternative? They're coming to kill all of us if they can, and either we fight them
Who's
there.
Who's coming to kill all of us?
The radical Islamic terrorists.
Okay.
And the Taliban.
Jews in particular, or?
Well, that's certainly their desire.
Israel and Palestine. You're pro-Israel?
Of course.
Or do you think the United States should be an honest broker?
I think by being an honest broker, we support Israel. Here's a free society that protects the rights of everybody, including the freest place in the world to be a Muslim is in Israel.
You disagree with people who say Israel has now become an oppressive, occupying nation with respect to Palestine?
As opposed to the country surrounding it? I mean,
do you think it's treating the people in Palestine well?
I think that it is treating them very appropriately. I mean, here is a people that are 65% of them, when they poll them, want to destroy the state of Israel. We're going to have a two-state solution with that state. You know, no
can do. We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank Dr. Arie Friedman. He was a Republican candidate in the Republican primary for the 10th Congressional District in 2010. He did rather nicely, came in late, got 15% of the vote. It was actually it was a good campaign.
Thank you.
Might have to, if you start, you might want to start earlier. We're not supporting you. We're just saying that might be an observation. Obama learned that when he lost to Bobby Rush in 2000. Right. He said, I started too late. He didn't raise enough money. He corrected that when he ran for the U.S. Senate, started almost 2 years before, raised $5 million. Now he's president. You would take Barack Obama as your role model in that sense, in terms of how to win a campaign?
Proper preparation and planning. There's the 6 Navy Ps. Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. Absolutely.
All right. And so you might run for the state Senate against Susan Garrett. You might run against Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky.
I've been asked to do that as well.
You live in Highland Park, so you would be moving.